I spent the entire weekend building a fence to keep my kids safe from the neighbor's dog. But on Monday morning I found it torn down, and my son's bicycle was in their yard. When I went to speak with the neighbor, she just laughed and said, "If you wanted privacy, you shouldn't have moved in next to me." Then her husband came out holding a crowbar and said, "If you touch our property again, it won't just be the fence that gets broken." 2 weeks later, a judge made a decision that left her screaming in the courthouse lobby. I live in Elin, North Carolina. It's not a big town but not too small either. We bought a fixer-upper 3 years ago. Just me, my wife, and our 2 children. I work in HVAC and my wife works part-time at a dental office. We don't live in luxury, but we chose this place because it had a nice yard. Big enough for our kids to run around, dig in the dirt, fall off their bikes and just be kids. The house needed some fixing but we worked on it and made it feel like home. Next door lived a couple, Debbie and Mark. They were there before we moved in. Debbie is the type who watches people from behind her blinds all day. Mark is the kind of guy who holds a beer before noon and doesn't wear a shirt unless he's forced to. When we first moved in, we waved at them. They didn't wave back. That's okay. Not everyone is friendly. We kept to ourselves and we thought they would too. But that wasn't the case. They had a dog, big, loud and rough-looking, with yellow eyes and a bark like a chainsaw. His name was Boomer. I don't know what kind of mix he is. Maybe some kind of shepherd mixed with something wild. No fence, no leash, no training. At first, Boomer would just bark at us from their yard. Then he started wandering over, sniffing around, leaving messes on our grass, chasing squirrels. My kids are young, 8 and 5. One day, Boomer ran toward my daughter while she was on her scooter. She dropped it and screamed. I ran out and scared the dog off. No one from the neighbor's house came out, not even to look. A few days later, my son was climbing the tree near our property line, and Boomer came back. He growled at my son, who got so scared he couldn't climb down. He just yelled until I came running. I went straight over to their house. Mark answered the door shirtless, sweating heavily like he had just woken up, or had too much to drink. Maybe both. I said, "Hey man, your dog is scaring my kids. He keeps coming into our yard. Could you please put him on a leash or something?" He took a long drink from his beer and said, "Dogs will be dogs." Then shut the door in my face. From inside I heard Debbie yell, "If you wanted space, you should have moved somewhere else." My wife said we needed a fence. I agreed. I took the weekend off and told my boss I had a home emergency. I bought everything, posts, panels, cement, and dug every hole myself. I got sunburned and my hands were covered in blisters. But by Sunday night, the fence was finished. 6 feet tall, in a straight line along the edge of our property. It didn't go over their side, didn't lean onto theirs. Right on the property line. I measured it 3 times to be sure. But Monday morning my son went outside for school and screamed. I thought he was hurt or bitten. I rushed out in my pajamas. The fence was gone. Not knocked over. Not broken. Every post had been pulled up. Every panel either laid flat or snapped in half. Even my tools were missing. There were chunks of cement scattered everywhere. And my son's bike. It had been thrown into the middle of their backyard like it was trash. I was furious. I walked straight over and knocked hard on their door. Debbie answered, wearing a robe and sipping her coffee like it was just a normal morning. She looked me up and down and said, "Told you, if you wanted privacy, you shouldn't have moved in next to me." I said firmly, "You tore down my fence." Then Mark appeared behind her, holding a crowbar. He said coldly, "Touch our property again, and it won't just be the fence that gets broken." I stepped back and called the police. Officer Stevens came. He was a nice guy but honestly didn't do much. He took pictures, asked a few questions and then told me, "It's a civil matter." A civil matter. My fence was gone. My kids were scared. My property had been damaged. I asked, "So they can just tear it down and get away with it?" He shrugged. "If it was on your property, you could sue." Sue. I didn't have thousands of dollars for a lawyer. I had a full-time job. I had bills to pay. But that night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Mark's voice in my head and thinking about that crowbar, and how frightened my children were. Then I got an idea. I stayed up all night at the kitchen table, just staring at my coffee as it went cold. Around 2 a.m. my wife came downstairs. She saw the look on my face and gently placed her hand on my shoulder. She didn't say anything, she just knew something inside me had changed. I couldn't afford a real lawyer, but I could afford to use my time wisely. So I got to work. I gathered every document I had, property records, the land survey from when we bought the house. It was all part of a packet I never thought I'd need again. But I remembered something from it. An old easement. A strip of land just a few feet wide that technically didn't belong to either house. It had been that way since the 1940s, when the lots were first divided. The next morning I took time off work and drove to the county recorder's office. I spent 3 hours flipping through old dusty files until I found what I needed. The easement still existed, and I had the legal right to use that land. Even better, they didn't. But I didn't tell them. Instead, I called a local surveyor and paid him $300 to come out and mark my exact property lines. I told him, "Make it loud, legal, and clear." He staked out every inch with bright orange markers and sprayed the lines in thick paint. Debbie came storming out while he was working, yelling, "What the hell are you doing?" I stayed calm. Just making sure everyone knows where the boundaries are. She glared at the stakes. "You think this means something?" I smiled and said, "Oh, it means everything." That night, I installed 3 security cameras. One aimed at the backyard, one at the driveway, and one facing their side of the property. I posted signs that said, "Recording in progress," and I made sure to register every camera with the local police, just in case. Then I waited. I had registered all 3 security cameras with the local police, just in case. A full week passed with nothing unusual happening. But then, around 1 a.m. one night, I noticed movement on the backyard camera. I got up, grabbed my phone, and saw Mark on the screen. He was shirtless again, holding that same crowbar. He walked up to one of the new survey stakes, looked straight into the camera, and yanked it out. I immediately called the police. This time I didn't ask for Officer Stevens. "This is vandalism," I told them. "It's on camera. I want a report filed, and I'm pressing charges." The officers arrived, watched the footage, and finally had to take it seriously. Mark received a citation. It wasn't a huge deal, but it was official, it was on record. I later found out he had a prior assault charge from 2009. Now he had another strike against him. But I wasn't finished. I built a second fence, this one set just inside the property line. It was only 4 feet tall, just enough to say, "You didn't break me." This time I filled the posts with rebar and concrete. 2 days later, someone threw raw meat over the fence. My kids almost picked it up, but I stopped them just in time. I took the meat to the vet and paid $60 to have it tested. The results came back. It had been laced with rat poison. That was the final straw. I went all in. I filed for a restraining order. I also talked to other neighbors, and the stories they shared were shocking. Apparently, Debbie and Mark had driven off the last 2 families who lived in our house. They had threatened people, damaged property, even hurt a dog. One neighbor said their dog, Boomer, bit her toddler, and Debbie and Mark never even apologized. The court date came quickly. I arrived prepared, with everything. The video footage, photos of the poison meat, property records, and statements from multiple neighbors. Debbie showed up in a glittery top like she was going out for dinner. Mark wore sunglasses inside. The judge barely spoke. He didn't need to. After reviewing the evidence, he issued a protective order, ordered Mark to surrender Boomer to animal control, and required them to pay restitution for damages. And then came the part that made Debbie completely lose it. He granted me exclusive use of the disputed strip of land for the next 10 years. Debbie screamed, loud enough for people in other courtrooms to hear. Mark tried to calm her down, but she slapped his arm and started yelling at him too. I just stood there silently watching. Then I turned and walked out of the courtroom with a small smile on my face. But it wasn't over. After that win in court, I felt proud but not safe. People like Debbie and Mark don't just back down. I had a feeling they weren't done yet. The day after the hearing, I came home from work and found my mailbox hanging by a single screw. Someone had kicked it hard. My camera didn't catch it, the angle was just off. I didn't even bother calling the police this time. I wanted them to get comfortable, careless. 3 days later, one of my cameras caught Mark talking to a man in a black pickup truck. No front license plate. They shook hands, chatted for a few minutes, and then the truck backed into my driveway briefly before speeding off. I didn't recognize the guy. 2 nights later, someone spray-painted the side of my house with the word rat in huge red letters. Now I was truly worried, not for myself but for my wife and kids. I couldn't sleep. I started carrying a flashlight and a bat whenever I took the dog out. I even moved my son's bed away from the window. And then it took another turn. I got a call from a clerk at the county office. She said someone had filed a zoning complaint, claiming I was running a business from my home without a permit. It was completely false. Yes, I own a work van, but I don't operate anything from home. The complaint had been submitted under a fake name, but the phone number used was Debbie's. The clerk recognized it because she'd seen my court case come through earlier. "You've got someone really petty on your hands," she said. I thanked her and started making my own calls. I contacted the old neighborhood committee, technically not an HOA, but they still kept records and handled complaints. I dug into public files and discovered Debbie and Mark had violated multiple local ordinances. Their shed didn't have a permit. Boomer had never been licensed. And the best part, their above-ground pool had been installed too close to the fence line, breaking town code. I filed anonymous complaints for every single violation. I attached photos and documents. Then I waited again. 2 weeks later, they were hit with 4 fines totaling over $3,000. And since the pool broke code, they were ordered to tear it down, or pay to have it professionally moved. That night, Debbie came storming over, banging on my door like she meant to break it. "You think you're smart," she hissed. I stepped outside, calmly shut the door behind me and said, "Smarter than you apparently," I said. Debbie raised her hand like she might hit me. I didn't flinch. I just pointed to the camera above the porch. "Go ahead," I told her. I wouldn't mind another charge on file. She stormed off, face red with anger. But the worst was yet to come. A week after the fines hit, things finally escalated. I came home from work one Friday and noticed smoke. Not thick black smoke, but a steady gray stream that signaled something was burning. It looked controlled but not clean. I ran straight to the backyard and saw flames creeping up the corner of my wooden fence. It wasn't a huge fire yet, but it was spreading fast. Someone had tossed a lit rag wrapped around a bottle, like a failed Molotov cocktail. It hadn't exploded, just smoldered in the spot where the fence met the shed. I grabbed the garden hose and put the fire out quickly, then called the fire department. After they arrived and looked everything over, the fire captain told me it was no accident. He said it was intentional and warned me to think about moving. That night my wife cried. My kids were scared. And I was exhausted. Not just angry, tired. Tired of reacting. Tired of waiting for the next hit. So I made a decision I never thought I would. I hired a private investigator. A friend from high school now worked for a PI firm out of Winston-Salem. I asked him to look into Debbie and Mark. Told him to dig up anything he could find. It took a few weeks and cost more than I wanted to spend, but what he found was worth every dollar. Turns out, Debbie and Mark weren't even supposed to be living in that house. The deed was still in Mark's mother's name. She had gone into a nursing home 2 years ago, and they'd been staying there without permission, dodging taxes and illegally cashing her Social Security checks the entire time. But that wasn't all. Mark had a sealed domestic battery record from Georgia. Debbie had been hit with 3 small claims over the past decade. Harassment, vandalism, all settled quietly. This time they picked the wrong neighbor. I sent everything anonymously to the county. Then I contacted Adult Protective Services and reported possible financial abuse involving Mark's mother. I gave them her name and the nursing home's address. Within days, the wheels started turning. PS showed up at their door. Then a county investigator. Then the IRS. Everything came crashing down. The state froze their bank account. The county started proceedings to seize the property over unpaid taxes. And Debbie, loud, smug Debbie, was charged with fraud. I stood in my front yard and watched as they were served the paperwork. Debbie screamed at the deputy. Mark just stood there, hands in his pockets like he knew the fight was over. 2 weeks later, a moving truck showed up. A sheriff's car sat nearby while they packed their things. They left behind Boomer's old doghouse. The spray paint on my siding had faded, but I didn't care anymore. But here's the part one didn't expect. About a month later, I received a letter from the county. When I had filed those complaints and paid for a private land survey, it triggered a reassessment of the property lines. That strip of easement land between our houses. It was now legally mine. But there was more. The reassessment also showed that I had to move my fence 2 feet back into my own yard. That meant the very first fence I built, the one Mark had torn down. He'd been right. Technically, it was on his side of the property line. That hit me hard. I stood in the yard with a tape measure in my hand, staring at the new property markers. I realized something. I hadn't just defended myself from a pair of cruel neighbors. I'd completely destroyed 2 people who were already drowning. Yes, they were aggressive. Yes, they were reckless. But I didn't just push back. I burned everything down because I could. I stayed there for a long time thinking. Then I left the fence where it was. Let the county come. Let them ask questions. Let them find me. After everything that had happened, I could live with that.